Welcome back to Narrowing the Divide. Today, I'm excited to have a conversation with a new friend, Philip Blackett. And Philip comes to us with a wealth of experience in places like Goldman Sachs and Chick-fil-A. He's an entrepreneur, an author, and a consultant. Philip, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Dan. Happy to be here with you.
Yeah, we had just a bit of a pre-chat before today's recording, and I'm excited for this conversation. I always say that. Maybe I should come up with a new tagline, but no, I am. I'm excited because you bring some interesting background. You've done a few things that intrigued me into the conversations I want to have. And the conversations I want to have are frankly, we discussed this specifically, but getting beyond the surface level. What I like to share with people is that too many people offer, their areas of expertise, and that's where they want to go on these shows and they want to pitch that. And I think that's fine. You can go and do that anywhere. I mentioned that beforehand as well. What I really like to try and highlight is, the stuff that we often fast forward through. So you grew up, you had experiences, you went to work in these different places, you probably had more experiences, and all of those things have led you to where you are. And that's usually where you end up. I want to know more about what's behind that, what the challenges looked like, and what some of the mindset difficulties that came up in those different transitions and stories that really led you to your growth and to where you're at today. But all that said, Philip, why don't you share with us, if you will, a little bit about what you are doing now, what your most recent book is, because you're an author, you've published several books. And any of those pieces that you think would be beneficial to share.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Dan. So, as you mentioned before, I've authored a number of books, 6 this year so far.
Wow.
I think I'm good. Actually, I might do a 7th one, but that's to be determined. But the book that I'm probably, one of the most proud about that I think is really timely and helpful for people is called Disagree Without Disrespect. Oof. How to respectfully debate with those who think, believe, and vote differently from you. And one of the reasons why I'm so driven by that book in particular is because I think, to your point, Dan, we live in a society now that's very much kind of black or white. There's no gray in between. There's no nuances. There's no, here's what I'm struggling with. Here's what I'm trying to understand. It's either you're all the way on one side of the extreme or all the way on the other side of the extreme. And the truth is, not everyone's like that. But now you have a setting where you're forcing people to decide one way or the other, where you're criticized if you are, criticized if you're not. And that's what leads a lot of people just to disengage from conversations altogether. And I've been in that same place too, where I've had certain viewpoints. And it doesn't have to deal with politics. It's anything.
Yeah.
Different belief, different thought. It's like, hey, Dan, what do you want for dinner? I want ravioli. Actually, I want pizza. Well, there's a difference of belief there. How we navigate that. And so I think what happens here was I wanted a cover for myself to be myself, right? This is like true authenticity from the standpoint of not begging someone to accept me for who I am or that sort, or create a safe space for me. It's more so saying, hey, I'm essentially saying I'm not going to be one of those people that says, I don't care what you think. I'm going to be me regardless of what you think. And that's that. It's more so the sense of saying, listen, it's not begging. It's not giving a damn. It's in the middle as far as saying, hey, I want to be able to share who I am, what is important to me. And I fully acknowledge that what I share with you about myself, there's some things you're going to agree with, and there's some things you're not. Let's go ahead and put that to the side as that's already understood. Now, how we go about the things that, it's easy to agree on, but more importantly, how do we go about the things that we disagree on? Because I believe that we can go in a world where we can be respectful to other people's viewpoints, and you can have a healthy relationship with people that you don't see eye to eye on. Because truth be told, Dan, I've been married for 8 years thus far. Mm-hmm. My wife and I do not agree on everything.
Imagine that.
But yet and still we're together. And if I believe what society said was that to love somebody, you have to agree with them on everything they believe on. Well, guess what? Based off that theory, my wife and I wouldn't have made it past the honeymoon stage.
Mm.
And so I think that sharing the framework behind that book is really helpful, because I think a lot of people are misled on how they look at relationships, whether it's family, friends, work colleagues, acquaintances, significant others, in the workplace, the boardroom, the living room, or the classroom. And we just lost the rules of engagement as far as how we go about things with people. If there's a difference of opinion, we have to preserve diversity of thought one way or the other. And I'm hoping this book will help to do so.
No, I love so much about that, and I love so much about what you shared. That book in particular caught my attention in your profile, which I will share, with the podcast audience through my page. There'll be a full bio accessible there for any of my guests. But that book did stand out, and it's because I agree so much with what you said. I have spent some time in and out of the dating world. I'm, divorced in 2017. And with that, I've been in and out of that space. And a lot of it has moved online, as you may be aware of. And I see that, right? I see profiles like, if you're a Trumper, swipe left. If, you support whomever, we can't get along. And my thought is always, wow, that's just, I get it. I get why that may be. It's difficult conversation, maybe that should or needs to be had, and you're just avoiding the difficulties right away. I don't have a problem with that, but it did strike me as interesting. And what that buzzword cancel culture came from exactly what you're saying. People who have a difference of opinion and don't have. I don't know if it's maybe you can help me with this one. I don't know if it's the ability to see, or I think it's more curiosity about what the difference of opinion really stems from. And, where are some defining points in there that we could potentially agree on? What does that look like? So could you share a little bit more about, let me change that question. Can I change that? I'm going to make this a personal question, Philip.
Sure.
What is the biggest difference of opinion that you and your wife have?
So we've talked about different types of issues altogether.
I'm going to edit that out. I lost my audio from my headset for a minute. It went straight to my MacBook for some reason. So can you speak again really quickly?
Sure. I didn't know if you want to phrase the question or just go right into the answer.
Yeah, I'll cut it after I phrase the question if you want to go right into the answer, if you're good with it.
Yeah. So my wife and I, we talk about a number of different topics and issues. My wife knows me, I would argue, better than anybody that's living on this earth. And what that means is I'm literally like transparent and naked in front of her. Like, don't have any mental pictures about that, but I'm meaning in terms of she knows me enough where any dumb questions I think are dumb, I ask her. Any vulnerable moments I share with her. And we've talked about a number of different topics and issues that a lot of people think is hands off, controversial, don't even try it. I've asked her questions as far as related to abortions. Mm-hmm. I've asked her questions regarding what are some of the top no issues to talk about here.
Politics.
Oh, yeah, politics, of course. It's one of those things that's like we talk about it and there's clear like difference of opinion. Mm-hmm. But I think what's important and what she appreciates from me is I'm not necessarily coming about it from the standpoint of I'm trying to impose or colonize your way of thinking and force you to think things the way I think or to reign superior over you because of how well I argue a point.
So much value there.
I go about it more so as like I'm sharing perspective so you know where I'm at. Mm-hmm. I hear where you're coming from. And I ask questions primarily to learn more about the backstory or the background on why she thinks the way she thinks. Mm-hmm. And then I also share ideas or questions as far as like, here's where I struggle with this, with what you're saying. Like, giving her an opportunity to like help address what's going on in my mind. And oftentimes my view is often modified, and it still may be one side or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But what helps there is she can see where I've benefited from hearing her perspective. She's benefited as well from mine. And we can talk about just about any controversial issue out there. And the ultimate goal is, one, we both better understand each other.
Yeah.
So in some sense, it's a level of information sharing that brings us closer together, more intimate between us. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then two, it's one where she can feel safe that we can just have a conversation. I'm not out to get her. I'm not out to embarrass her. I'm not out to call her outside of her name or silence her or cancel her. Right. But we can actually have a conversation and we can learn more about each other and know how to move forward from here.
I love that. I really do. I think there's such an intimate interpersonal connection that can be created from that level of depth and understanding of each other. And I think it's extremely valuable. And that's what you're teaching in this book, essentially?
Yeah, essentially that. I think I got inspired in part where my mom worked in a courtroom when I was growing up. And she's well acquainted with having attorneys come in. One's on one side of the issue, one's on the other. And they argue their cases, rebut each other very passionately, very aggressively sometimes.
Yeah.
But once the case is closed, I always or oftentimes would notice something that most people wouldn't.
They get together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Out of the courtroom, absolutely. They would shake hands. They might congratulate the other person on the case. I'll often see them have lunch together afterwards, maybe go to their daughter's soccer game on the weekends, maybe enjoy holidays with the family of the other person. And we live in a time now where people would think that's just as horrible as sleeping with the enemy. Right?
Yeah.
But back in those times, which were not too far away from now, that was a sense of saying, hey, we had a job to do. We fulfilled that job, but we could still have a relationship or friendship, some sort of affinity towards one another that goes beyond what we were doing, which was basically arguing the issue at hand.
Yeah.
And so I'm reminded of that. I'm reminded of Supreme Court justices that had friendships with people that were on opposite on ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
As far as one being very conservative, one being very liberal, but yet they still had a great friendship. In politics as well, I've seen couples have something similar too. One's a Republican, one's a Democrat. They've been married for 40, 50 years. You can't tell me after seeing that it's not possible for us. I'll give you one more example too. What's your favorite sports team, Dan?
My favorite sports team, and I'll caveat this by saying, the last thing I enjoy talking about is sports overall when I'm in, depth of conversation with people, but the Steelers.
Okay, perfect. Pittsburgh Steelers, you're at Heinz Field, right? A bunch of black and yellow shirts and towels, all in that sort, right? Thousands and thousands of people. You're in the midst of that, right? Hopefully they'll have a good season with Russell Wilson, the quarterback, but that's a whole nother issue. But Dan, out of those thousands of people rooting for the Steelers, are there probably people there that would probably vote Democrat, for example?
I would make the assumption out of thousands of people that that's a distinct possibility.
Are there also probably people there that probably would vote Republican?
Again, distinct possibility, probability.
Are there people that probably they call themselves Christians?
Yes.
Jewish?
Probably so.
Muslim?
I would assume.
None of the above?
Probably so.
So if you have people that clearly vote or believe differently, but they're at a sporting event rooting for the same team, is it possible to think that there's ways that people can still be in relationship with one another, even though they believe or vote differently from one another?
I'm in full support of that concept, and which is partly what intrigued me about this part of the conversation for sure. I think it's entirely possible. And what a trend. I did not know that's where you're going to go with that, by the way. I thought you were going to bring up a rival team somehow, or, someone that I might be opposed to begin with as a Steelers fan. But I love that example.
So I think the big thing is it's reminding people, yes, people often like what laud sports and music, saying, oh, it levels the playing field. It brings people together. You're right. But let's also remember that as far as saying, hey, that means that it is possible for us to congregate, to share life together, to do life together, even if you don't see eye to eye on everything. And I think that we need those reminders to let us know that, okay, being able to respectfully debate or disagree with is not a hard concept here.
No, I'm in that boat. We'll call it a boat. I'm in that same mindset as I would love to see more of people doing what you're doing and having tough conversations with respect for each other's opinions or beliefs. Because that for me is where, it really strikes home is beliefs. Just because you carry a certain belief doesn't make that belief right or wrong. And I'm not here to tell you it's wrong. I'd much rather figure out, well, how can we get along even though we have differing beliefs or different, backgrounds or different ethnicities, different religious upbringings, all the pieces, which leads me to another question. We talked a little bit about this, but you're advocating also. You talked, well, no, before I get there, I want to talk about that. I think you know where I'm going. Before I get there, I want to go back and just ask you, was there a pivotal moment? You talked about, watching your mother in the courtrooms as you were growing up and seeing those engagements with the lawyers. And I'm sure you've observed the atmosphere, especially in politics in current times over the past, 10 years or so. Is there a pivotal moment for you personally that caused you to recognize there's got to be a better way to do these things?
Yeah, of course. It was 4th of July last year, 2023.
Okay.
Basically, I had my family up in Boston. My sister's family came up here from Atlanta. My mom came up here from Memphis. We were all together right around the 4th of July weekend. Mm-hmm. We were sitting on the couch, living room. My sister and I, she's younger than me, about 22 months younger. We're having a conversation. I don't remember what the topic is now. All I know is, Dan, is that we were on opposite ends of the issue. Mm-hmm. And I thought of it as a great idea to dig a little bit deeper, mm-hmm. to share about our perspectives here. My mother thought otherwise. She jumped in as a referee, threw out the flag, and said, nope, we're not going to do this. Mm. And I was like, why? And she was alluding to the fact that, hey, we have 4th of July fireworks coming on later tonight. I don't want to see an early show of those fireworks right now. Mm. And so while I appreciate her intent as far as trying to keep the peace within the family and preserve a great memory of us being around for the 4th of July together.
Right.
The impact for me, Dan, was that it was a missed opportunity for me to better understand my sister and for her to better understand me, especially since we don't see each other often. And I think what came off in my head afterwards was, damn, like, if I can't be myself in front of my sister and my family and still like be loved for it, how many other people around the country, if not globally, are probably experiencing something similar, where even simple family get-togethers, you cannot truly be yourself and share what's important to you and navigate disagreements without worrying that all hell is going to break loose. And so that's what made me thinking back to the courtroom example, mm-hmm. there has to be a way that people can navigate disagreements and still preserve the relationship. We've done it before. We can do it again. let me see what that is about. And that's where the book came out.
That's so interesting. And I have one more question because I'm curious, Philip. You shared how your mom stepped in and was avoiding the early fireworks showing, of course, prior to the celebratory fireworks. Would you say that experience that she was trying to prevent was something that would have been prevalent in past family engagements?
So as far as like the arguments, or as far as someone stepping into
the arguments, would they have blown up previous to that moment?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So well, not without justification.
Yeah, I think she's a very outspoken woman. She'll let you know her views, and I think a lot of where I get my outspokenness comes from her. And so basically it's like two twins just like in the same room together. Watch out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it has. And I think that's kind of where, oftentimes people said years ago, hey, you don't talk about politics, religion, money at the dinner table.
Yeah.
Or when company comes over. And part of it is because you don't know how people are going to respond.
Right.
And if you're not comfortable or well-versed or well-experienced or skilled to navigate those type of tough moments and candid conversations, it's probably best just to avoid it, just to make sure nothing bad comes out of it. But I was looking at it more so in a sense, like, how can I help equip people with some sort of framework, some sort of skill set to say, hey, let's go down that road. Let's test it out. Let's try it out. We'll learn. If we make some mistakes, that's fine, but we get better at it, because the main objective here is I want us to have an environment where we can be open with one another and we can be ourselves, and we can still be friends. We can still be family. We can still be connected to one another.
That's so good. I have another question now, so bear with me.
Sure.
So then there must have been a moment on the 4th of July last year then that clicked with you, that decided that made you decide you wanted to, instead of arguing, as you indicated you may have in the past, you chose to dig into and try and understand. What led you to that moment in you that made you want to understand instead of going the usual route?
Well, I think to be frank with you, Dan, my mom and I were kind of like in an on and off relationship.
Okay.
Right. And part of that is because there are a lot of things that we agree with, and there's probably more that we disagree with. And how we go about those disagreements, I think, has impacted our relationship for sure. And I felt hurt by that, not only just as far as what things were said in those disagreements, but, quite frankly, it's just like the distance between us, because we just haven't figured out a way to really navigate through those. And oftentimes it's much easier for me to not engage if it feels like if I make a phone call, it's going to lead to an argument, or it's going to be a back and forth for 2 hours, which I was originally hoping for just a 10-minute check-in call. And I think for me, it's just one where it's like at a certain point, you live long enough to kind of play the odds as far as, okay, what is this likely going to be? Do I want to take a chance on this, or do I want to not?
Right.
And I think that, that was a huge factor for me, just kind of thinking like, would I like my relationship with my mother to be better? Of course. Would I like my relationship with other family members to be better? Of course. I also recognize that if we don't find a way to navigate this type of thing, but even more so for me, how do I go about it? Because oftentimes I would be more passive and just keep my thoughts inside.
Yeah.
I would referee myself and just say, hey, don't share this. Don't talk about this. I know you want to share this about yourself, but hey, they're lost. They don't even know of it. And so I think at some point you have to say, listen, we have to figure out a way to have at least an attempt to share things and be candid with one another, to be open with one another. And it's a great way to really test and see like if that unconditional love is really there. But also, like I said before, like just kind of getting outside of myself, Dan, and just thinking, if I'm experiencing this, if my family's experiencing this, who else is probably experiencing this? And so it's just thinking to myself, like, yes, this is a labor of love writing this book, but I'm also hoping that this is an act of service to others that might be in a similar state, similar stage, that could be helpful for their relationships, family or otherwise.
Absolutely. Is it fair then to say that what really ultimately led to the moment, that pivotal moment on July 4th, was recognizing the strain in your relationship, the stress that comes from that experience, and not wanting to transfer that into the relationship you have with your sister?
Not only with my sister, but I don't want to transfer that to my wife and my kids.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's so good.
I think as a husband, as a father, you should be protective over your family, right? Mm-hmm. And really be that gatekeeper of what comes through there. It's not enough just to have a placemat in front of your house that says good vibes only in order to protect anything negative from coming into your house and impacting the people you love. So I think of it in terms of, kind of putting to end, if you want to call it, generational curses, generational cycles, right? So that basically saying, hey, the buck is going to stop here with me as far as us having these awkward conversations where we can't really be open with one another. We can't figure out a way to disagree with one another lovingly and respectfully, because I know the impact it's had on my life. And I love my wife and I love my kids enough to know I don't want them experiencing that. And I extend that same love for the rest of my family.
Yeah.
But if nothing else, I need to take care of the family I've been trusted with and have stewardship over. And that's my wife and kids. And I don't want the next generation to go through what I went through.
That's very commendable. And I've had a similar experience, right? When I first had daughters, it sort of was a pivotal moment for me and how I was wanting to create change in the world and how we treat each other from a dignity and respect between sexes, especially. I was in the military, and there was a lot of, it was before it came to Congress as an issue, but there was a lot of sexual harassment and assaults occurring in that realm. And a lot of it stems from the way we view people and talk to them. And I think it's applicable to what you're saying here and how we treat people with dignity and respect in these conversations. But I like your reasoning. I love your reasonings. And I absolutely agree with you. It's a good transition point to what I wanted to get to a minute ago. And that's, you shared with me that you grew up without a father being present in your world, and you're advocating that that's creating a big challenge in society. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I would contend that if there was a major problem, not just in our country, but maybe worldwide, it's the epidemic of fatherlessness. Mm-hmm. I think that, as I approach 40, I'm married for 8 years, a father for 7 years with these kids. I start to reflect a lot on how I grew up. And my father was around, but he wasn't really around, if you know what I mean. Like, he was in the same city. I just didn't see him much for whatever reason. Right. And I think that when I think about that in full circle now, there's been voids needed to be filled. There were lost memories, lost moments that other kids had with their fathers that I did not. There were times where I tried to figure out who was I going to be as a young man, that I couldn't come to the person that at least is half of me, so to speak,
right,
that helped play a part in creating me, that I could go to. So you're left trying to find answers from other sources. Maybe it's from people you hang out with. Maybe it's from the culture. Maybe it's from the TV, the movies, the music, and that sort. And I think a lot of people that didn't have the great fortune of growing up in 2-parent households there's a lot of rediscovering and redefining happening. And the best way to really figure out who you are, why you're here, what's your purpose, how do you relate with one another, should come from your parents. And oftentimes, more the burden is on the mother for single parent households than needed. I would reckon to say a mother can't truly teach a man how to be a man, as far as a young man, right?
Yeah.
And on the flip side, there's a level of a father's love that a daughter needs to have that helps her ground herself in who she's going to be and how she relates to others and how she can see for her spouse or her significant other that could be modeled in some sense of the example shared in the home with her father. And so it's almost a sense where it's almost like, for me as a man of faith, I think about it on the question of, what would life be like if there was no heavenly father, if there was no creator?
Mm-hmm.
If I truly believe that, how would I go about life? Who am I? What is my purpose? You're trying to figure things out, and God bless you in trying to figure it out. And so I think that, for me, even not even taking into account the research that's been out there as far as like the tendencies of people that grew up fatherless, as far as what that can lead to drugs, and incarceration, to dropouts, to teen pregnancies, all these different things, right? Not even addressing all that. It's just, I'm just going off the fact that it's hard for you to get a good sense of who you are and how you go about transitioning that to the next generation when you become a father, when you become a mother, and you're often reliving what you experience, and that void, that hole, it still does damage to how you go about things. So now it does become a generational cycle.
Yeah.
Because I'll often hear stories of young men that weren't there for their families, and they partly blame the fact that their fathers weren't there as well. So now it's almost like they're repeating themselves. They know what's wrong, but for some reason, they didn't have a good example to tell them otherwise, and they just repeated the cycle. And so I think for me, like any sort of issue like that, where you're dealing with people, oftentimes it's trying to figure out who they are as people. And if you're missing a key ingredient on that, that's where a lot of issues can come out.
I don't disagree whatsoever. I grew up, my father passed away when I was 3. And then there was a stepfather fairly present-ish in the same house. So not just in the same town, and never saw him, but might as well not have seen much. And I can reflect on, I did learn so much from my mom about treating people with kindness and respect. And I learned from that perspective, but absolutely, felt looking back, a little lost in that missing piece, right? The father, with the lessons that a father can bring to the life of children, especially, but, as we grow into young adults, there's a lot of components to that piece. And what do you suggest then? Or what did you find? Let me ask it that way. What did you find that worked best for you in that discovery and bringing you around? I think I know the answer, but bringing you around to the thought process that you have about it now, and how you've worked to change that in your life and your generations to come.
Yeah, I think for me, the initial step was, if your father wasn't there, who can you find as a replacement? Right?
Yeah.
And so whether it's a stepfather or a father figure, I think at the same time, even in the midst of those, imitation is still not the real thing. Right? So at some point in time, you can go with somebody else's father on a fishing trip, or they can take you to a basketball game and that sort. But at the end of the day, they're going to drop you off at your house, and they're going to go back home to their kids. And they're going to spend that time getting them ready for dinner, for brushing teeth, for bedtime, for story time. And you're by yourself with your mother, right? So at the end of the day, you still miss out. It's only just covering a portion. So even amidst of father figures and that sort, that's a temporary Band-Aid maybe, but at the same time, it's short-lived for a reason. I think what I had to come up with at a certain point was find a more long-term fix for me, that even if I never have the type of relationship with my father I always wanted, even if he doesn't become the man I always wanted to be like, and I had to look elsewhere, I essentially came to the conclusion that even though my earthly father did not measure up to how I wanted my father to be like, I needed to look beyond him and look towards my heavenly father. And so my faith as a Christian was strengthened in the process through that hurt. And I delved even deeper to understand what my creator is like as a heavenly father, and having him step in that role for me. Because I know that in that case, even if your mother or father forsake you, to paraphrase, God is still for me. And that is helpful stability for me, regardless of what life brings for the rest of my time.
And so then you have, how old were you when that process for you took place?
It's a continuing part, as I have to remind myself. But I think it really started to hit that way in college.
Okay.
You're out of your mother's home. You're away from your grandparents, your grandfather. You're out in the quote unquote real world to a certain degree. And you're starting to learn what being a young adult looks like, what a young man looks like, in the midst of all the cultural influences around you while on campus. And I think for me, the Bible I had back then is still the Bible I have right behind me, going 20 years plus. Yeah. And it's just like, I remember many moments where I basically had to consult it for guidance and pray through whatever situations was going on and just build a relationship with God that way that stood the test of time.
I think there's a lot of value in that. And I'm just curious again. I'm constantly curious. I love these types of conversations. So first of all, thank you. But I'm curious. There had to have been a moment where you threw your hands up and you were like, picked up this Bible and started looking into the Bible for some of the answers that you had found yourself seeking, right? Do you care to share a little bit about what that piece looked like?
I think of one moment, freshman year, I was seeing a young lady I was very interested in, and come to find out that she was seeing me and seeing somebody else at the same time.
Oof.
And she didn't tell me that. I found out otherwise.
Right.
And as a young 18-year-old, testosterone, hormones raging, that sort of thing, you find out, and she happens to be living on the same floor as you on the dormitory. I wanted to let her know I found out and let her know what I thought about it. My roommate got wind of it. He basically barricaded between me and the door and said, I don't think that's a good idea for you to go talk to her. My other friend got on the phone, called my grandfather, got him on the phone to talk to me, to calm me down.
Oh, my.
And basically how it all wrestled out, Dan, I didn't go see her for a number of days. I just sat back at my desk. I pulled out my Bible and I started looking at passages that dealt with anger.
Yeah.
That dealt with disappointment, and that dealt with sadness, and praying through that, asking for the right way to respond to this, the right way for me to respond to her, because I couldn't ignore her forever.
Right.
And I remember key Bible verses I came across that really answered that time where I was trying to go about things the right way. And ever since that moment, it just made a key moment in my mind that I can trust the Bible with what it says to help me through any moment on how to best approach any stage or any moment that I go through in life. If I just continue to put my faith in God and His Word.
What a great learning moment, and what a powerful testament to what can be learned, whether you have full faith or not. That's a great. I assume at that point you weren't like fully vested in your faith, but you did find some answers that made you feel better in that moment. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. What a great story. Thank you for taking a moment to share that. And by the way, I think it's probably really great that your roommate did not have an agreement with you on your behavior and decision-making ability in that moment, because I could see that going completely different if he's like, yeah, this is awful. It could have been a whole different scenario. So I'm glad you had that difference of opinion.
I'm glad as well.
It's funny. So, hey, I want to be respectful of your time. So I like to move towards wrapping up. Where can people learn more? I know we haven't even scratched the surface about some of the things that you're doing. Where can people go and find out more about your current work, some of the books you've published? And do you have something you want to offer for others? I'm open to that.
Yeah. So I think, I appreciate that, Dan. Anybody's wanting to see what I've written to see if it might be of interest to you. The 6 books I've written up to this point and published, they're on Amazon. Just look up my name, Philip Blackett, Philip Blackett, and you'll see those books written or listed, and see if whether it's Disagree Without Disrespect or another book on there that might be of interest to you. By all means, check it out. You can also visit my website, philipblackett.com. And definitely learn more about me and what I'm doing in particular, and see if there's something that might be of interest to you there.
That's wonderful. I appreciate that, Philip. And I appreciate this conversation. I feel like I could continue to dig into some of these pieces, which is exactly what I want to do with the show. So I appreciate that flexibility and willingness to be a bit vulnerable and not just share your expertise, but about how you uncovered some of that for yourself. I think that that's extremely valuable.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any parting thoughts or one word of wisdom that you live by?
Well, I think the biggest thing is, you live long enough, you're going to go through good and bad times. And oftentimes your experience, your expertise isn't just the degrees you've gotten or the companies you've worked with. It's through some of these experiences that I've talked about with you, Dan, here. Oftentimes things that don't make the highlight reel, they don't find themselves in the biography. They're things that, they can put you in a vulnerable space, but there's still lessons learned even when things don't go your way. I often think that oftentimes you learn more from failure and when things don't go the way you want than you do when you succeed, because oftentimes those lessons in failure, they actually prepare you for what you didn't know beforehand to help gear you towards success in any level. And so the biggest thing I would say here is just, take inventory of those type of experiences for you. Don't be afraid to dig deep, just like what we did here, as far as the stories I've shared, and see if you can uncover some of those lessons that you can apply now and really position yourself to that type of success you want, whether it's academic, career, relationship, or otherwise.
I love that. Thank you so much. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up here. I just want to ask you that if you're listening to this conversation and there's something that stood out to you, I'd love to hear about it. And you can do that in one of 2 ways. You can simply share it with other people in your network to help other people find that conversation and the value you took away from it. And then if you wanted to tell me about it directly, you can go to podcast.danw.us and you can leave me a message there or voicemail. I think the voicemail feature is super cool, by the way. If you're curious how I do that, ask that question as well. I'll be happy to share. Of course, if you're a podcaster, there's lots of valuable resources out there. Philip, I am grateful for this conversation and for your time. And if you want to know any more about Philip, I will make sure that the links to his website and where you can find his books, of course, is published in our show notes.